start by helping you understand what we mean by the word choice architecture. Choice architecture is all about the design of different ways in which choices can be presented to a customer and the impact of that presentation of the design and how that impacts the customer's decision-making process. A choice architect will define the number of choices presented, the way that the details are described, and often they'll allow things like a default or a base option to get there. All of these are the sort of things that can influence a customer's decision. But let me just stop there for a second. Is there anybody in the room that is a choice architect? So no hands have gone up whatsoever. I actually believe you are all choice architects. And I'm going to tell you why. So whether you're creating for your clients video content, perhaps display advertising, maybe you design some websites, probably put together some shopper marketing engagements or social media programs, you're ultimately helping your clients fulfill the science of choice architecture. Consumers all have a choice, and your job as agencies is to find a way to sway a consumer to favor your client's brands over the others. In fact, I would say you have been practicing choice architecture for a long time, even in your own business, and you've been doing it in every place except in your fee proposals. So if you've ever presented creative ideas to a client, maybe you've presented multiple media plans, maybe you've presented website options, social media strategies, in all cases, you've gone to the client bringing options for the client to consider. And chances are you've found a way, when you're presenting these ideas to the client, to emphasize the one option that you believe is the best for a client. You are a choice architect. So if you've done that, congratulations, you've been in the science of choice architecture for a long time. The world of choice architecture is probably much more familiar in social programs, whether it's about getting people to sign up for healthcare programs, Medicare, or even things like the DMV. And here's the DMV example. The next time you get your license renewed, you'll probably see an option on the renewal form that says, will you be an organ donor? And these days, actually, that's already pre-checked for you. That's called choice architecture. It's about driving you to make decisions or taking away, in some cases, the chance that you make a decision that isn't necessarily the favored one. Now, I'd like to joke that in WPP, certainly, we have about 1,000 people managing the costs in the company for every one person that's managing our pricing. I think sometimes I'm just the one. The science of pricing, and in fact, I think we'd call it the art of pricing, is not that easy. But the good news is there are techniques such as choice architecture that helps make it a little bit easier. Within your agency, you should think of pricing as a team sport, something you have to do together. It takes a lot of time and energy, and it ultimately takes a fair bit of innovation to do it well. For those of you in the room, I bet most of you spend 10 times more on your cost management than you do on pricing strategy. Very few of us, by the way, become adored by our clients because we're cost cutters, even in this day and age where they're constantly looking for better deals. If all you do is add up the staff costs or the hours for a project, you probably don't have a pricing strategy. In fact, if your finance department is your pricing team, you probably don't have a pricing strategy at all. You have a costing strategy. I encourage you not to let the pricing of your services to be just the domain of those people who are comfortable to use Excel. That is no way to run your business. So here's a test of whether you're on the right track. When you present your staffing plan or the number of anticipated hours to a client, what's the first question that you get from the client? Chances are you get the question which is, well, how come it takes so many hours? And the reason they do that is the only thing you put in front of them is the one thing that they're going to question. And so the challenge that you have is how do you put multiple options in front of the client that drives a far better dialogue and a far better approach? And of course, we always say that value is in the eye of the beholder. And so choice architecture is ultimately about focusing that eye on what you want them to see so that they make the choice that is best for them and best for you. And of course, we always make the classic mistake of only presenting one fee proposal when presenting to our clients. Why do we do that? Even though we know in every other part of our business we need to present multiple ones. I want to just suggest a little bit of what your fee proposals look like at the moment in the client's eyes. Well, no, we're going to talk about this first. we're going to talk about better ways to present options to your clients, certainly using the concept of options. In pricing, this can also be referred to as versioning. So there's a lot of words that get used, whether it's versioning, pricing structure, value engineering, and so on. But all of this really is about choice architecture. I think we've gone back. We've lost a slide, Tim. Can we go back?
I think that's it. I think.
Yeah, all right. So your clients are ultimately expert pricers. They do this for a living. In fact, they have people dedicated to pricing functions. Your clients probably have entire departments, and those departments are loaded with data scientists who are all working to determine the best way to market and price their products and services. Most of you leave it to your accountants. If you go to LinkedIn and you search for a title like pricing or price, you'll actually get over 350,000 hits of people that have pricing in their title. And so a question for you is, do you have anybody in your business that has pricing in their title? Is this what you do? We as an industry have ultimately been quite lazy in the discipline of pricing. For those of you that have been around long enough and worked on commissions, we didn't have to work on pricing because it was predetermined. Then we moved into staffing plans and cost plus or hourly rates. It was all predetermined. So we've actually been slow to adopt the concept of a pricing strategy and a pricing discipline within our businesses. That was the one I was going to show. So just as a point, when we present our pricing to our clients, this is typically what the clients see when we present our fee proposals.
Pay attention, please, thank you. Is next day there? Very nice. Is next evening there? Very nice. Next swimwear.
I think we can do better, but that tends to be what we look like in front of our clients these days. I am a huge fan of McKinsey. There's a lot that we've learned from them, certainly within WPP. I think I'd like to say I'm sort of a student of how they behave and how they manage their company. They train over 25,000 employees on how to write proposals. And because they write a lot of proposals, and because they're a data-driven organization, they have tracked their proposals and tested the best way that those proposals work and how to get a client to say yes. Their process is one that they taught us on a couple of years ago. It's known as RIOLA, and it has a very important section in it that is boxed here called options. So they go through and they teach their people about understanding the relationships they have with the client, who has the stronger relationships, what are the interests of the client, what are the things that they can sell, and then ultimately when they know what they can sell to the client, how do they package that in a manner that presents options to the client to help them make a decision that's right for them. But of course, as McKinsey, they're all about legitimizing their proposals and making sure that every one of them makes sense to the client, and they have backup plans as well. There's a session that we held within WPP for a number of senior managers a few years ago, and we invited a senior partner from McKinsey to come and talk to us. This is a very, very short clip from a fellow named Richard Benson Armour, and he's speaking to a group of WPP leaders about the importance of options.
We're looking for multiple equivalent options that we put out there. The more options you have in terms of how you can structure the relationship, the better off you are. Josh will give you the numbers, but it's between 30 and 40% more likely to settle if you put multiple options on the table up front. Don't forget that number. If you're so smart you don't need a 1/3 advantage, forget it. I need all the advantage I can get. I put multiple options on the table because I know I'm at least 1/3 more likely to win if I put different flavors of the same basic thing out there. Now, how do I craft my options? I link them to the full extent that I can to the interest. We look here for some creative, wild ideas in terms of the options. Some structures that you may not think would go down, but they're linked back to the interests of the people, and they're exciting. I put on the table the one where don't pay me a dime until the cash hits the bottom line. It's really tough to say no. No, I don't want to work with you because basically I don't like you is the only response they can give me. Because the money's hitting the bottom line. It's costing them nothing. But once it's there, we can show the benefits. So be creative and be flexible. The words on the slide are wind in the hair. I don't care what analogy you use. Figure out something that allows you to get excited about the option you put on the table, because that excitement will come across.
So what he's saying is it's the one-third advantage. And if you don't need that one-third advantage, don't bother with what we're telling you today.
So just to test your mental acuity after a nice large lunch, can anyone tell me how long this piece of rope is? Or would you venture a guess? I bet if we went for a raise of hands, we'd get anywhere from 2 feet to 20 feet. It's pretty hard to judge, isn't it? But if I were to reveal that this is actually the base of a floor lamp, you'd be able to give me a much better, much more educated guess on the length of this rope. This is the principle taught by behavioral economists like Dan Ariely, that we humans need context in order to make judgments, and particularly in order to make buying decisions. Imagine going to a restaurant and the wine list features one choice of wine, one price. That would never happen. We instead see 15 to 20 choices of wine, from most expensive to least expensive, which enables people like Homer Simpson to feel like he's made a good decision in selecting the second least expensive wine. And actually, Homer Simpson is emblematic of the way we process information as buyers versus Spock. Classical economics teaches that people and buyers were rational people making rational decisions, where behavioral economists teach, no, actually, we're a lot more like Homer Simpson. We make very human, very irrational decisions, even in the world of buying and selling professional services. So this is where the elements of pricing psychology and behavioral economics can really help us, the principles of choice architecture we're talking about. So how do we put choice in context in an advertising agency when we're serving up a proposal to a client or a prospect? Well, we can do this with options. And we're going to show you lots of examples of options today, because you can do this for anything from a single project to a year-long campaign to a multi-year relationship. Here's an example that's particularly leading edge. This is to develop an Alexa skills app. And the agency that is working on this project put together a very solid list of deliverables and attached a price to it. But instead of just presenting this as a yes or no, take it or leave it price to their client, they instead developed a second lower priced option, which takes out some of the features and deliverables, and a third higher priced option, which is more deluxe, more the premium price. And in addition to that, given them nice names. It's not a good, better, best. It's not a small, medium, large. The idea of putting titles and headlines and descriptors on your options is a really smart thing to do. Now notice that quality is a constant here. We always want to offer a quality product. Delta Airlines has 13 classes of service, but everybody on that airplane has the same takeoff, in-air, and landing experience, so constant quality. But what we're doing here is we're adding and subtracting different features, outputs, and deliverables. So if you've never had the experience of presenting options to your clients, I think I can pretty much guarantee this will happen to you the first time you do this. It almost immediately and magically changes the conversation from how many hours will this take to which of these options will work best for you. We'll be having the conversation that we should have, which is about outputs and outcomes, the value we're about to create for that client, not our cost of service and the number of our inputs. So let's look a little bit more about how options are constructed. And the benefit of adding a choice of yeses rather than just a yes or no in terms of how you structure your pricing. If we price a project and we attach a single price of $50,000, of course, every client who buys that project is going to pay $50,000. So that stands to reason. What happens if we add a second price? Same project, but served up as options with various degrees of outputs. So now we have a second option, which we're going to price a little higher at $75,000. If we're equally successful in selling in those two options, then our average price is now going to increase to $63,000. But what happens if we add a third option? And should we add that option at the lower end or at the higher end? Let's take a look at what happens in each of those scenarios. If we add a third price at a lower price, so now we have the 50 and 75 we had before, but now we've added a third price at 25. That actually hasn't helped us much. Assuming that the middle option is chosen most often, which it is, and actually this indicates pretty close what the research shows in professional services. About 70% of the time, it's human nature to pick the middle option, and there's some science and psychology behind that. But this really hasn't helped us much. What happens if we add our third price at the higher end of the spectrum? So we've got our 50 and 75, but now we have a premium option at 100. Again, assuming most prospects pick the middle option and then they pick 1 and 3 in equal proportions, we now have an average price of $75,000. So the math here almost always works out the same way, and it's why McKinsey is saying it helps them sell in, on average, about a third higher pricing. And if that sounds attractive to you, then options is certainly worth considering. Let's look at how this plays out in the world that we live in as consumers. Apple has a watch priced at $329 and another at $749. Guess which one is the better seller? It's, of course, the less expensive watch. So a unwise retailer might decide, well, what we really need to do is lower the price of the $749 model if we want to sell more of them. But what does Apple do, and what do smart pricing professionals do? Well, they add a third option that's much higher price, a premium option at almost $1,400, and now the best-selling watch is which? It's the middle option now. It's the $749. There are a lot of interesting pricing experiments that have been done in this area. So it's also important that we think about how we construct the options and what we include as standard versus this is extra, this is an add-on. So this is a pricing experiment with a Ford SUV in which we've got standard equipment with a sub-price and then some special equipment, which are pretty essential things you probably want. Total price of $42,479. What happens if we attach the exact same price, $42,479, same car, same price, but this window sticker presents everything as standard equipment? Well, it turns out that option 2 is much preferred, much seen as less expensive, perceived as less expensive, even though it's the same exact price, same exact vehicle. So the moral for agencies is make sure that we include all the critical elements that we know are important to our client in our preferred option, in the option that we think is going to serve them best, or that we want to nudge them toward. Speaking of which, that's really what this is about. Probably many of you have read the book Nudge. There's also The Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. Lots of great books on this topic that all are teaching and using the principles of behavioral economics to help nudge our clients toward making a good decision. Presenting options is not meant to be a shell game. It's instead helping your clients, giving your clients information and context for them to be able to judge the value of what you're doing. Now, it is possible to provide too many options. There is that could be too much of a good thing. And here I'd like to just share a quick clip by Barry Schwartz, who will talk briefly about what he calls the choice paradox of choice.
with so many options to choose from, people find it very difficult to choose at all. I'll give you one very dramatic example of this, a study that was done of investments in voluntary retirement plans. A colleague of mine got access to investment records from Vanguard, the gigantic mutual fund company of about 1 million employees in about 2,000 different workplaces. And what she found is that for every 10 mutual funds the employer offered, rate of participation went down 2%. You offer 50 funds, 10% fewer employees participate than if you only offer 5. Why? Because with 50 funds to choose from, it's so damn hard to decide which fund to choose that you just put it off till tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and of course tomorrow never comes.
So what's the right number? As you've seen already, and you'll see in some more examples Rick is about to share, 3 tends to be the optimal number. 2 is not enough. 4 is okay. More than 4 tends to be too many. Then we get into the paradox of choice. And the way we present this price in writing is actually quite important. Of these 3 ways to manifest price on a written document, which do you think is most effective or looks least expensive? Last one, exactly. The point here is that a written price is like written prose. We want to keep it as simple as necessary. You don't need the dollar sign. You certainly don't need the decimal points. We're not selling to accountants here. We're just trying to communicate the value of what we're doing for our clients. Similarly, there's some science behind pricing the higher value ideation, strategic development, concept work, which is in effect knowledge work and is approximate. And so there we want to use a round number, whereas in production, implementation, execution work, that is and probably should be unit price. And in that sense, it makes a lot more sense to use a precise number. It's that kind of a number a client might ask you to break down, and you certainly can. So in terms of putting options together, what's the best way if you feel like this might be something worth experimenting with on your next project? Well, there's actually a large menu of things that you can choose from, but the first place to start is what are the objectives and outcomes we're trying to accomplish with this assignment? That's just a brief statement, an articulation of the desired result, the desired outcome from option 1, option 2, option 3, and they might all have a slightly different description of desired outcome because option 1 will be a lot more ambitious than option 3. From there, you'd want to consider, are we going to do any insights and strategy work with this assignment? What should be included? That might be included in your highest price, some of it in your middle price, and maybe none in your lowest price. How are we then going to manifest that strategy as a solution, whether it be a media plan or a recommendation or an idea for experiential marketing? Creation and development, how many concepts, how many versions, how many actual pieces of work are we going to do? And similarly with production and deployment. And here, you can also think about, well, in our highest price option, we'll do it all. Middle option, we'll do most of it. Option 3, we'll do concept and hand off to the client's in-house agency or hand off to another production partner. And then the last phase, at the tail end of this, what kind of analytics are we going to employ and what kind of optimization and so forth would we do for this? That might be in your option 1, some in option 2, and maybe none at all in option 3. Beyond that, you can include lots of other things. The degree of collaboration with other agencies, how fast this needs to be done, the amount of reporting, asset management, even things like contract and payment terms. Do you want to pay us all up front, pay us 50% now, 50% later, amortized over 12 months? These all are ways to add and subtract value from your options. So the primary value of options is that it enables the right conversation. Instead of having a discussion about costs incurred, we're having a discussion about value created. So now I'd like to turn it to Rick, who is going to show you many examples from the real world, most from WPP agencies, of how options are playing out across the globe.
So Tim has shown you the sort of the theory behind it. We've been working with Tim for over 3 years, and Tim has introduced a number of things to our agencies. We brought him in to talk about progressive pricing strategies to help us get our head around the fact that there are more ways of doing things than just the hourly rate or the cost plus deal. But what Tim has really brought to our companies, and the ones that we're going to show you some examples from, is a new discipline that is referred to as a pricing council. And the pricing council essentially, I don't want to disparage our friends in finance, but it removes the responsibility of pricing away from what would be a single finance function, really to make it more of a team sport, to make sure that everybody from the CEO to our discipline heads of creative planning, media, and so on are actually helping to set pricing for any work that we might do. And a pricing council is just a fabulous way to get the company to think differently about how to present itself. And options, of course, is a critical part of that learning. So I've got for you 8 examples from different agencies from around the world who are all trying options. And I don't think I want to stand here and say, hey, we figured it out, it's perfect, we know exactly what works and doesn't work, because we've only been doing this for the last couple of years. But I'll show you a couple of things, and you'll start to see themes coming up that you can use for yourselves. I'll also do a little bit of warning, which is a few of these are so heavy in type that you may not be able to read them. And the point is to show you the construct and the layout and the sort of words that you use, rather than to have you write down everything on the chart. But I believe all of these presentations are available to you, so you can look at them in more detail rather than up here on the screen. So here's a UK agency that was pitching for a clothing company, global clothing company. And of course, they did a couple of clever things. They first of all took the idea of a clothing tag. They put some nice naming on this. You know, we have the slim fit option, the classic fit, or the custom fit. And they've done this in a way that makes it very easy, again, for the client to choose what's most important. So the slim fit, we would say in this example, is really the core program. It's what the client will have to do regardless of what their budgets are if they expect to be in this world. And they show, what's listed in terms of the outputs under the core program, what the benefits to the client will be, and then they have put a budget figure in here of £160,000. Then they do an add-on. So the second option in this case, rather than it being a complete new reset, is an add-on. So fairly easy to follow. I know what the core is. Oh, I have the choice of getting some add-ons, such as 12 internal stakeholder interviews, external focus group sessions. The additional benefits are greater internal support, deeper insights, et cetera, et cetera. And they've got a price tag that goes up to £220,000 for this. Or they have what they call the custom fit, which again takes the first and the second and then adds on 3 more critical items. And so they set that up as, and listing what those are, and then telling the client what the benefits to that are as well. So a fairly simple way of displaying the options and giving the client the benefit of pricing from £160,000 up to £250,000. So that's example 1. Then we had an agency that was pitching for a drinks company. And so as a drinks company, they put a little bit of creativity behind their naming. They referred to their options with a nice little liquor bottle. It's cute, but actually quite helpful. And what they've done here is they again have said, here's what the core proposal is. It's just under £1 million. And then what they've used is some iconography to help the client navigate what's different between the proposals. So as you move from the first proposal to the second, they call the second an analytics boost. So it's the core proposal, and then the second one is an analytics boost. And they show you using simple iconography like the 3 stars. You're going to see more general strategy and content, where if you take the third option, and again, they refer to this as the ideation boost. So it's the core program plus ideation. And again, they said that there's much more effort on the social media content than there was in the previous one. And again, they list all of the outputs and options. So that's example number 2. Example number 3 comes from AKQA in our London office, and there's 2 examples from AKQA I want to show you. These are the ones that I think you might have a harder time reading, and that's okay, because I just want to make the point of what they're selling here. But ultimately what they've done is they put together some proposals from a client who said, I think I need to do a hackathon. I think I need to figure out how to get my teams together and do something unique. Well, the problem we have when clients brief us is that clients often don't know what they want. And so by putting together options like this, you're helping the client figure out what it is that they really want. And so in this case, they proposed option 1 was a single day practical session. They talk about making sure they understand what the business problems are from the client, what the consumer insights, so they have fundamental information. And then they go to the next one, which is a full-on multi-day session that'll have different groups coming in and going out. And then they can go to what they call the Hackathon Maxi, which is a week-long session. And the whole idea of the week-long session is meant to actually deliver an output, a final outcome, which could probably be a real product that will come to fruition after they go through about 4 or 5 sprints over time. So an interesting way to do that, and they have some pricing here that in this case runs from £10,000 to £70,000. And by the way, I don't believe the pricing is actually the real pricing. It just gives you an idea of the span that's here. So the second one from AKQA, similar sort of thing. They were trying to find ways to put together a program that they could invite all clients to. And they've set this up as sort of the emerging technology workshops. And it's as simple as, we have a deep dive into retail and what's happening to retail and e-commerce. Then they have the next one, which is this could be a 3-year look at where we believe the industry is evolving to. And then the final option they would call sort of your machine learning prototype team. So again, they are listing a number of things that are available. Obviously, these are 3 fundamentally different programs, but it was all about trying to help the client figure out what they were really looking for. So if we move on from that and we move away from the area of digital, let's talk about a strategic communications program. A little bit simpler in its layout, but here we had an agency that says, I'm going to give you the option 1, which is an essentials. So for this price, you get the essential work, and here is the list of about 9 or 10 things that will be included in that. Fairly simple to see that option 2 has another half dozen items that are being added to that scope, obviously for an additional price. Or you can go from the transformative communication strategy all the way up to game changer communications. And of course, the outputs are far more involved, and therefore the price has gone up in that case. So fairly easy way to say to the client, what of these things are important to you? And what we find when we do this is that it actually drives a conversation. And it isn't that we're necessarily looking for the client to say, yes, thank you very much. We've looked at your options in committee, and we've now decided on 2, go with that. This usually drives further conversations of what's most important. And it may be that the client would say, you know what, I need a little bit of a mix between what you've got here as 2 and 3, in which case we go back and we say, right, here's an additional option which considers your 2 and 3. What we don't do, because this is what typically happens, is procurement says, could you break down each of these things and give me a price for each one of them? That would be the no-no, and that takes away all the benefit of doing options. In fact, when we get pushed into it, we make sure that a unit pricing for each item on this list adds up to far more than the bundle pricing. In other words, you want to discourage the idea that you can break this apart and buy these things piecemeal, because we really want to get into the conversation about what we're doing rather than what the unit pricing is. Now here's an alternative approach to using options, which is not about the output, but it's actually about the pricing itself. And so this is an agency that has given the client 3 different pricing approaches to do the same work. And option 1 says, you'll pay me $1.5 million a year for a core team, and that core team will be always on, always available. They'll be thinking about your business. They'll be working with you hand in hand throughout the year, helping you get your programs done. But since the client was not sure whether they needed to do all of the campaigns that they had set forth, they've given them unit pricing. So core team plus the price for doing the campaign for product 1, product 2, and product 3. And of course, option 1 has a nice fee. I think we'd all like that, about $6.7 million. And that, by the way, is the lowest priced option, and therefore actually the most efficient pricing option. Option 2 says, okay, maybe you don't have the appetite for a core team fee. We'll then price each of these items individually. So we have no contact with you. You show up on a Monday and said, I need product number 1 done and we've essentially built in our costs to do each of these individually rather than as a bundle. That ends up being almost $1 million more expensive, which again is encouragement to try to get the client to go for the lower option. But then there's a third option here, which is actually all about removing the commitment from the client to paying us a core team fee and saying, I'll give you the pricing unit by unit at our lowest level, and now I'm going to actually make my fee contingent based on outcomes. And by the way, if I hit 100% of your targets, you'll pay me $3 million. And by the way, when I hit 100% of all your targets, you are going to be thrilled. In fact, our line for the insecure procurement person that says, I would never, ever pay you a 30% bonus, I always say, well, you actually, if you get all these KPIs and you tick all the boxes, you might be able to fly in your private jet to send me that check, rather than, why are you nervous about paying me more when you're also succeeding? But it's a very clever way of using options to help the client make a decision on what they're doing. So moving from that, now this is the eye chart that I was warning you about. And this is from one of our PR agencies in Australia. And what their goal was to put together some programs that were easily accessible to potential clients. They wanted to get people to try them. They wanted to find ways to get them in the door so that, and make it easy for them to sign up for programs. So they looked at two different programs. One was, for PR people, a media training program. And they set that up with 3 different options. Now, they've gone in the reverse order, which is what's far over here on the right, is their basic option, and they call this compliance. And then they go all the way over to what's known as their preparation and response option. What's really clever about the way they've done this, and I highly recommend that you do this, is they've got a section here which is called Why Choose This Package, which is ultimately the summary for the client to say, this is what matters to you, and this is what we know about you, and this is why you should choose it. They've gone slightly differently on the cyber breach program, and they've provided 4 different options. It's up in the air whether 3 is the right number, whether 4 is too many. I personally believe 3 is the right number, and when you get to 4, you start confusing the client. But that's going to come up to testing and science, and we'll figure out how that really plays out. Tim, anything else you want to add on those? I have one more. Yeah. So the last one is, again, not a real proposal. This was about solving a problem we have with the client. And guess what the problem was? The client didn't have enough money to do all the things they wanted. Never happens, right? And so what this agency did was they said to the client, all right, and these are nice numbers, so this is for a New York agency for a large global firm. They said, you've got a $9.1 million annual budget. I can't get you all the way that you need to get to for 9.1 unless we reduce some of the creative that's going to be developed for a holiday campaign, plus we're going to remove some of the ad hoc projects, and then frankly anything that you want on top of this core set of work, you'll pay for incrementally as it comes in. So the agency was sure to say to the client, I can do work for you at your budget. But then they presented 3 other options. And they said, if you go all the way up to $10 million, I can do everything you want. In other words, it's going to cost you another $700,000, $800,000 to go all the way and do what you want. Or I can get you partway there, option 2. So for an extra $500,000, we can do it. We will reduce some of the creative development for your holiday campaign. But you should be pretty happy with what's there. And then option 3, even smaller increase, not quite as high, but will reduce even more. So we get into that realm of options for the client. And here's what that did. Without an awful lot of discussion, the client chose option 2. And so these are the situations where you make the communication clear, you give the client the ability to make a decision. You don't give them an up or down, which is it's either 9.1 or it's 10 or nothing. Like, stop wasting my time. Work with them and show them that you're willing to be flexible and find different ways of working. Great. So that's the eight examples. Tim, you want to sum up?
Yep. Well, we're running down the clock here. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Can you take me back, please? Just to sum up, I guess the central message here is to remember that your role as agency leaders and managers isn't to count costs. You've got a CFO and a accounting department who can do that for you, project managers and so forth. Your job is to architect choices. Remember that pricing is an art, it's not a science. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. As Rick indicated, These are test and learn kinds of experiences for agencies, and you'll have the same experience, but you get better and better as you go, one client at a time. You have the ability with both current clients and prospects to transform the way you approach pricing in your agencies. So on behalf of Rick and myself, thanks very much for inviting us. We appreciate joining you today.